My name is Sylvia Mercer. I am 62 years old, a retired school librarian, and for most of my life, I thought I understood the shape of grief. I thought I knew what loss felt like, how it moved through the body, how it settled behind the ribs like an old photograph that never quite fades. But nothing prepared me for the morning I buried my son and walked away from the cemetery with dirt still clinging to my shoes. If you're listening now, stay with me. This story may be heavy at first, but it leads somewhere honest. And if you feel something in these moments, don't forget to follow the channel so you won't miss what comes next. Some journeys deserve to be heard all the way through. The day began with a quiet that felt wrong, the kind of quiet that makes the walls hold their breath. I sat in my living room with a cup of chamomile tea going cold between my hands, staring at the portrait of my boys on the mantel. Ethan, the older one, with his steady smile. Caleb, 3 years younger, leaning into his brother like he always had someone to fall against. I touched the frame with my fingertips, tracing the edge the way I used to trace their faces when they were small. And just when my mind tried to settle, the weight of the day pressed down again. I had just buried Ethan. There is no sentence harder for a mother to carry. I left the cemetery a little before noon. The sky was a dull winter gray, stretched thin, and the wind carried that cold scent of fresh soil. I remember clutching the small white program from the service, the paper bending in my grip. The priest had said his final words. The guests had drifted away, and Caleb had given me a stiff hug before rushing off with his wife, Marissa. They claimed they needed to speak with a real estate agent about something urgent. I didn't question it then. I didn't have the strength to. I simply nodded and watched them leave in their polished black SUV, its tinted windows swallowing them whole. When I finally stepped inside my house, something in the air felt unfamiliar, too still, too arranged. Ethan used to say that silence could be comforting if you invited it in. But that day, the silence didn't feel invited at all. My tea kettle clicked on the counter, ready to boil. But even the sound felt distant. I wished for Ethan's voice, the way he would call out, "Mom, I'm home," in that warm tone that made every room feel less empty. I sank into the armchair near the fireplace, the warmth brushing against my knees. The chamomile scent drifted upward. I closed my eyes, letting the ache in my chest expand until it felt almost unbearable. And then my phone vibrated. At first, I didn't want to answer. I didn't want to speak to anyone. But the screen flashed with a familiar name. Grant Hale, my attorney of more than 20 years, the man who helped me settle my husband's estate and guided me when I downsized to this quiet coastal town. Grant wasn't the kind of man who called without reason. I swiped to answer, expecting some forgotten signature or condolence he hadn't had time to offer at the service. What I heard instead made the room tilt. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and urgent. "You need to hear this alone." The words sliced straight through the fog in my mind. "Grant? What are you talking about?" "You need to come to my office right now," he continued. "And please, don't tell Caleb you're coming. Not him. Not anyone. Just you." I straightened in my chair, gripping the phone tighter. "Why? What happened?" There was a pause. Too long. Too heavy. "I can't explain it over the phone," he said. "It's dangerous. Please trust me." Dangerous. The word didn't belong in my world. Not in the world of a retired librarian who spent afternoons labeling recipe cards and walking the beach collecting small pieces of sea glass. But the tone in his voice wasn't something I could ignore. Something inside me stirred, a thin wire of instinct pulling tight. "Grant?" I whispered. My son just passed away. I know, he said gently. That's why you need to come. The call ended with a click that echoed through the room. I stared at the screen, my reflection faint in the black glass. My heart began to race, not in grief this time, but in fear, sharp and unexpected. For a moment, I sat frozen, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a passing car, the brittle crackle of the fireplace. Each sound felt too loud, as if the house suddenly didn't want me inside it. I tried calling Caleb, just to hear his voice, just to understand if something else had gone wrong, but it went straight to voicemail. His message was the same cheerful greeting he recorded months ago. It felt uncanny now, his tone too bright, too rehearsed, too wrong for a day like this. I grabbed my coat from the hook by the door. My hands were trembling as I buttoned it. For a moment, I hesitated, glancing at the mantel where Ethan's picture stood. His eyes, steady, warm, seemed to follow me. I reached out and touched the frame one more time. "I'll be back soon," I murmured, though I wasn't sure who I was saying it to. Outside, the wind hit my face, carrying the scent of pine and ocean salt. I walked to my car, each step feeling heavier. The lock clicked beneath my thumb. I settled into the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles paled. A part of me wanted to turn back, curl up inside with another cup of tea, pretend the world had stopped moving. But another part, the part that had survived losing my husband and raising 2 sons alone, refused to sit still. I started the engine. The dashboard lights flickered on. The road ahead stretched long and quiet, but something in the distance felt like it was waiting for me, waiting with an urgency I could not name. As I pulled out of the driveway, I whispered to myself, "What are you hiding? From me, Grant?" And beneath that, quieter still, a thought I didn't want to face. Why can't I tell Caleb? The sea glimmered through the trees as I drove toward town. My heart thudded in steady, nervous beats. I had no idea that by the time I reached Grant's office, everything I believed about my family, my sons, and the truth itself would begin to unravel. And I had no idea who would be standing at the door, waiting for me. But when I arrived and saw the figure in the hallway, my heart nearly stopped. The wake was in the community hall by the harbor, the same hall where I once ran a book club. The room smelled like coffee and waxed floors and lilies. A theater for grief. People came in slow waves, folding into chairs, voices a soft hum. I moved through them like someone watching a play, my program folded in my hand, my thumb tracing the crease. Caleb stood near the front with a ledger, shaking hands and accepting condolences with that practiced warmth. He wore a new dark suit that fit too well. Beside him, Marissa lingered, lipstick perfectly set, offering tissues and precise consolations. Her laugh landed at exactly the moment the room needed it and slid away like a practice note. Neighbors and old friends brought casseroles and stories. Clara, who had been a nurse, held my hand and said nothing but steady things with her eyes. A younger woman presented a photograph of Ethan with a crooked grin. Someone set down a dish still warm. The noise of plates made a small life for the day that felt almost normal, and I clung to those normal things the way one clings to a chair in rough water. A man at the back checked his phone with a careful attention that made him stand out. He wore a blue polo and kept straightening his posture. I noted him and turned away. Small things kept piling up. A hand that lingered too long on my shoulder, a laugh a little too bright, a whispered question that mentioned Seacrest like a footnote someone had forgotten. Across the room, I watched a phone preview flash when Marissa bent to pick up a plate. "Closing today?" The message disappeared as light tilted. It could have been nothing. It could have been everything. My throat tightened and I folded my program until the paper creased under my fingers. Caleb moved like someone staging a performance. At one point, he stepped aside and returned with a small brown envelope, which he slid into the inner pocket of his jacket with a deliberate motion. The action felt practiced. Men who hide small things know how to make the motion invisible. The envelope did not belong to the ordinary flow of sympathy. At the refreshment table, I stirred my coffee to steady myself and found a folded slip of paper under a napkin. Suncrest Holdings printed in neat type. The name meant nothing to me, but the neatness felt purposeful. I slipped the note into my palm and kept moving, not wanting to cause a scene in a room that had come to mourn. At the window, I watched the harbor reflect a pale sky. Inside, fragments of conversation circled. Selling the house, Seacrest, buyer interest. Each piece built like a small machine behind smiling faces. The thought of my son folded into an argument about profit made my chest hot and sharp. I excused myself to the restroom where the mirror made my face look thinner than I felt. Cold water on my wrists steadied me. On the sink rim, I found a damp receipt tucked as if left by mistake. Earnest deposit. Buyer. Far. The corner was torn, but the word buyer was clear and the amount legible enough to drop a stone into my stomach. I folded the receipt into my pocket and smoothed my skirt. When I returned, Marissa approached with the same easy sympathy. "Sylvia," she said, voice soft as if reading from a script. She touched my hand with practiced gentleness. Her palm was warm and steady. When she moved, her fingers brushed the memorial table and made a small rise in the tablecloth where an outline might hide. I kept my movements calm. I would not break the fragile courtesy of the room. I accepted another cup of coffee and stored each name and memory in a quiet shelf inside me. But a new kind of attention had been lit, something that would not let me sleep easily. The receipt in my pocket was a cold, small accusation pressed against my side. I watched small moments as if they were clues. A neighbor pressed a casserole into my hands and then, with careful casualness, asked if I had thought about selling the house. The question felt out of place. Caleb spoke with a man near the window using words like earnest and closing, and Marissa listened, smiling at the right moments. When Caleb slipped the envelope into his pocket again, his fingers brushed the cloth in a way that made me notice the rise where something might hide. I did not confront him. There were rules to behavior in rooms like that, and I would not break them on impulse. At the refreshment table, I accepted a small piece of lemon cake to steady myself. The harbor light through the window made patterns on the floor, and the gulls sounded like a far-off memory. I smoothed my skirt and folded my program. The paper crease, a small ritual I kept like an anchor. The receipt in my pocket felt like a cold stone. I would not act on it in public. I would wait. Evidence, I had learned, reveals itself if you gather details and do not force the shape. For now, I would keep watch and let what needed to be seen make itself visible. Afterward, I sat in my car with the engine off and the paper burning a small shape against my thigh. Other cars pulled away, passengers wiping their eyes and rearranging themselves into ordinary errands. I touched the receipt and folded it once more, promising myself I would not act rashly. Grief had made me slow, but it had not made me blind. I had learned to wait, to collect small details, to let evidence arrange itself into a pattern I could follow. The wake wound down with soft goodbyes. People left in pairs, hugging and promising to call. I stood by the table a little longer until the hall emptied and the hum faded. Outside, the harbor breathed the same indifferent breath. Inside, my grief had shifted. It had edges now that hinted at something else. an unasked question that would not go away. Caleb arrived at my house the next morning carrying a polished folder tucked under his arm. The early light through the kitchen window made the paper edges glow. He spoke with the kind of brightness people use when they want something. I felt it before he even sat down today. Marissa followed him in with a smile that felt rehearsed, placing a small bag of pastries on the counter as if hospitality could soften the edges of their visit. She brushed invisible crumbs away and glanced at Caleb in a way that told me they had already agreed on everything. Caleb opened the folder with a measured flourish, sliding a glossy brochure toward me. The cover showed a coastal retirement community named Seacrest Haven, all clean walkways and smiling couples. He spoke about calm living, safety, medical access, and how downsizing might help me after the stressful months. His words. Marissa stepped closer, her perfume drifting like something intentional. She mentioned brochures, tours, incentives for early decisions. Her voice held a careful sympathy that never reached her eyes. She kept adjusting the sleeve of her sweater, a small signal I had learned to read as preparation. They had rehearsed every. I asked why they had come unannounced, and Caleb smiled in a way that didn't match the room. He pushed the brochure closer, pointing to diagrams of compact homes and monthly fees. He claimed it would simplify my life. His fingers tapped the table, quick and restless, betraying a pressure. I told him the house was not a burden. It carried memories, roots, seasons, and stories. He nodded politely, but dismissed my words with a polite breath. Marissa set her hand lightly on his shoulder as if easing him forward. He opened another folder, thicker filled with forms I had. He said the documents were only suggestions for future planning, nothing binding, just ideas. His tone was overly smooth. Marissa leaned in, emphasizing how communities like Seacrest filled quickly and how acting soon could prevent complications. I felt a quiet pressure rise around me like a soft tide I had. I excused myself to refill my tea, needing distance. In the kitchen, the sunlight hit the sink in a way that made the metal shine. When I opened the trash bin to toss a wrapper, a torn piece of paper peeked from beneath a cardboard tray. The jagged edge revealed. It was part of a legal form, the header printed with a familiar phrase, "Power of Attorney." The signature line was missing, ripped cleanly away. My breath stalled as I held the fragment. Someone had prepared this. Someone had destroyed it. The realization settled like a cold stone inside me. I folded the fragment and slipped it into my pocket, steadying my hands before returning to the table. Caleb watched me with a fixed brightness, the kind that hides an agenda. Marissa offered me another pastry, speaking about comfort and ease. I nodded, storing each gesture in the quiet corners. Caleb resumed his presentation, turning pages with the precision of a salesman. He spoke about rising costs, property upkeep, potential hazards of living alone. His tone wrapped concern around control. I listened quietly, studying the way his thumb pressed the corner of each page as if keeping the paper still. I asked whether he had discussed any of this with Ethan before his passing, and a shadow flickered across Caleb's expression. He recovered quickly, saying he had wanted to bring it up, but never found the right moment. The explanation slid over me without landing. Something about the timing felt. Marissa began describing the advantages of the community, again, her cadence soft and steady. She emphasized safety and companionship, 2 words chosen carefully. She placed a hand on my arm, guiding attention back to the folder. Her touch felt gentle, but the insistence beneath it carried an urgency. I listened. I told them I needed time to think. Caleb exchanged a glance with Marissa, a silent conversation passing between them. He mentioned an upcoming deadline that seemed to appear from nowhere. His voice softened, almost pleading, yet something in it tightened at the edges. I sensed an impatience beneath everything, He suggested I sign a simple acknowledgement to review later, nothing final. He slid the paper toward me with a gentle smile. The pen rested beside it like an invitation. I studied his expression and saw a quick flicker of urgency. My hand stayed on my lap steady despite everything. I told him I would read everything on my own time. His smile tightened, though he tried to hide it. Marissa folded the brochure with slow precision as if restraining frustration. I stood and walked to the window, letting the cold light steady my breathing while the house felt suddenly. Caleb asked if I had any questions, but I shook my head. I told them I needed time alone to sort my thoughts. Marissa gathered the folders with a quiet sigh. They walked to the door with polite farewells that felt like rehearsed lines. When it closed, the house settled. I waited until their car pulled away before opening the drawer, where I kept a small notebook. I wrote down every detail I could remember: the envelope in his pocket, the torn form in the trash, the unspoken tension. Each note sharpened a worry that had begun as a feint. I closed the notebook and sat on the couch, letting the quiet settle around me. The house felt unchanged, yet something essential had shifted. The air carried a brittle quality, as if holding its breath. I looked toward the hallway where sunlight dimmed and understood that this conversation had been. I stood and walked to the kitchen window, letting the afternoon light brush across the counter. The house that had always been my refuge now felt watched in some unseen way. I breathed slowly, grounding myself. Whatever Caleb and Marissa had planned, I sensed the truth would soon reveal everything. The next morning began with a gray sky pressing low over the trees, the kind of sky that makes everything feel quieter than it should. I stood at the kitchen counter stirring a cup of tea that had already cooled, my mind replaying the brochure, the hidden envelope, the torn form in the trash. Each detail moved in circles, not settling, not leaving. The house creaked softly in the stillness, as if listening with me. I tried to steady myself, reminding my hands not to shake, reminding my breath to keep its rhythm. I had lived through loss before. I could live through questions too. My phone lit up on the counter. Grant's name glowed across the screen. I hesitated before answering, a small flick of fear moving through me. His voice came through steady and urgent, stripped of its usual calm. "Sylvia," he said, "I need you to come to my office at 9. Alone." The word alone landed with a familiar weight. He had said it before. This time it sounded even more final. I asked if something was wrong. He avoided the question, instead repeating the time and reminding me not to mention anything to Caleb. His voice carried a strain I hadn't heard since the day he helped me settle my husband's affairs years ago. It was the voice of a man balancing something fragile. "I'm not trying to alarm you," he said, "but I need you here. It's important." The call ended as abruptly as it came. I stared at the silent phone, its screen reflecting the faint outline of my face. I felt the same tug inside me that I had felt the night before, a warning I couldn't name. I pressed my palm against the counter to steady myself. There was no room for doubt now. Something was wrong, and whatever it was, Grant was trying to keep me safe without saying so aloud. I walked to the hallway mirror, smoothing the collar of my coat. My reflection looked older than I remembered, the grief settling into the small lines around my mouth and eyes. I adjusted the scarf at my neck and told myself that clarity always came with daylight, even when daylight felt thin. I reached for my keys as the kettle clicked behind me, its small sound echoing through the quiet. Before leaving, I typed a message to Evie, my neighbor in Seacrest, who had become a soft presence in my life. I told her I'd be out for the morning, then hesitated, deleting the part about feeling uneasy. I rewrote the message to something simple about errands, nothing more. Before hitting send, I stared at the words, then erased them entirely and slipped the phone into my pocket. Some instincts come from a place deeper than thought. I trusted that place now. The driveway was still damp from the night rain. I stepped carefully, pulling my coat tighter around me as a cold breeze drifted in from the ocean. My car door groaned softly when I opened it, the sound familiar and grounding. As the engine started, the dashboard lights flickered in their usual warm glow. I sat there for a moment with my hands on the wheel, steadying my breath before backing out. As I reached the end of the street, I saw Caleb's car parked a few houses down. He wasn't inside. He was standing outside a neighbor's yard, phone pressed to his ear, pacing with a stiffness I recognized from years of watching him struggle with things he refused to admit. His head turned slightly as if sensing movement, but he didn't notice my car slipping past. I lowered my gaze and kept driving, my pulse tightening at the sight of him there at that hour. The road stretched ahead, leading toward downtown. Pines lined both sides, their branches bending under the wind. I drove carefully, the morning light shifting between the trees. At one point, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror and saw the tension in my shoulders, the little crease between my brows. I loosened my grip on the wheel, forcing my hands to soften. By the time I reached the building where Grant kept his office, the sky had begun to brighten, though the light still felt muted. The structure stood tall with its mirrored windows reflecting the faint outline of clouds. I parked near the entrance and sat for a moment, gathering myself. The lobby door gleamed under the dim sun, its glass catching a soft glint, like an invitation and a warning at the same time. Inside, the lobby hummed with quiet morning sounds. The elevator chimed low and steady as doors slid open. A cleaning staff member mopped the far corner, the faint scent of lemon filling the space. I approached the elevator and pressed the button, listening to the mechanical hum grow louder. Each sound felt amplified today, each step an echo of questions that had yet to be answered. The elevator ride felt longer than usual. The mirrored walls reflected my coat, my scarf, the way my fingers twisted together. I pressed my palms flat against my sides and focused on breathing evenly. When the doors opened to the 10th floor, the hallway was silent. Only the soft overhead lights filled the space, casting a pale glow on the carpet. I walked toward Grant's door, noticing it was already cracked open. A thin sliver of warm light spilled into the hallway. My heartbeat quickened. I pushed the door slightly wider and stepped inside. Grant stood near his desk with papers spread out before him. His tie was loose, and the tiredness on his face struck me immediately. He looked up as soon as he heard me enter. "Sylvia," he said, motioning me inside. "Thank you for coming." "What's going on?" I asked, closing the door behind me. He glanced toward the hallway before speaking again. "I need to show you something, but first, I'm glad you came alone." His words settled between us like dust in a still room. He gestured for me to come closer, and I stepped toward the desk. Documents lay arranged in neat rows, each page placed with deliberate care. He rested his hand on them as if steadying the truth itself. "Before we begin," he said quietly, "I need you to prepare yourself. What you're about to learn may feel difficult, but it's necessary." The room's warmth felt suddenly heavier, as though the air had thickened around us. Outside the window, the sky shifted from gray to pale blue, clouds drifting like slow-moving thoughts. I swallowed hard and steadied myself, trusting the instinct that had brought me here. Whatever waited in this room, I would face it. Grant reached for the first document, his hand trembling ever so slightly, and as he lifted the page toward me, I felt something inside me brace against the moment that was coming. Grant's office felt warmer than the hallway, almost too warm, as if the air had been holding its breath. Sunlight filtered through the blinds in thin stripes, cutting across the desk where a set of papers lay arranged with a precision that made my stomach tighten. I stepped closer, each footfall soft on the carpet. The silence between us thick and waiting. Grant didn't speak right away. He watched me with the steady patience of someone preparing to hand over something delicate. His fingers tapped the corner of the first document before he finally slid it toward me. "Just take your time," he said. His voice was gentle, but the weight beneath it was unmistakable. I looked down. The first page was a medical report bearing my own name in the next of kin section. I recognized the hospital letterhead, the dates, the official stamps. It summarized injuries, toxicology, cause of death, all tied to the body I had believed to be my son. Everything looked legitimate. Too legitimate. That was the first thing that unsettled me. There was no hesitance in the pen strokes, no smudges, no corrections, just clean, perfect lines. I lifted the page with careful fingers. Grant watched my reaction closely. "That report," he said, "is not real." The sentence pushed the air from my lungs. I stared at him. "What do you mean it's not real? It came from the hospital. They gave it to me." "They gave you something," he replied, "but not the truth." My knees weakened. I steadied myself by gripping the edge of the desk. Grant reached into the stack again, pulling out a second page. This one a transfer authorization signed at the mortuary. "Look at the signature," he said. "Look closely." I leaned in. The signature belonged to someone with my name, but the handwriting was wrong. Too rounded, too neat. Mine was smaller, shakier, more compressed. This signature looked confident, practiced, a perfect imitation. "Someone forged this," I whispered. "Yes," Grant answered softly, "and it wasn't random." I felt a chill rise from my spine, moving into my shoulders. My breath grew shallow. I had trusted the process of grief, the routine of paperwork, the people who nodded solemnly as I signed documents I barely understood. Now, the certainty I had relied on felt like sand shifting beneath my feet. Grant placed another folder before me, thicker, heavier. "This one will be harder," he warned, "but you deserve to know." With trembling fingers, I opened it. Inside were photographs, grainy images taken from traffic cameras and building entrances. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. Then, on the third image, my heart stilled. A familiar figure walked through a dim parking garage. Familiar height, familiar jacket, familiar posture, familiar tilt of the head. It couldn't be. My breath caught. Grant stepped closer and spoke quietly, as though afraid the air itself might shatter. "You were told your son died 3 weeks ago, but these were taken 2 weeks ago." I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling my pulse struggling beneath my palm. The world shifted, slow and unreal. "You're saying—" My voice faded. Grant didn't finish the sentence for me. He simply lifted his eyes and held my gaze. I whispered the rest myself. "Ethan is alive?" A heavy silence filled the room. Grant inhaled slowly, choosing each word with care. "I need you to stay calm, and I need you to listen." He gestured toward the photographs. "Your son didn't die. He made it appear that way." I sank into the nearest chair before my legs gave out. The carpet blurred for a moment as tears gathered but didn't fall. Held back by shock. My hand slowly tightened around the edge of the folder, the paper slightly crinkling beneath my grip. Grant spoke again, more slowly now. "He had reasons, Sylvia. Reasons tied to things you don't yet know. He wasn't running from you. He wasn't abandoning you. He was protecting you. The room pulsed with a quiet thrum. I tried to breathe evenly, but each inhale shook. Ethan alive. The words echoed like footsteps in an empty hall. Grant stepped away from the desk and moved toward a small door near the back of the office. It was half hidden behind a tall plant I had never paid attention to before. He rested his hand on the knob, looking at me as if asking permission without words. "Before you see him," Grant said softly, "I need you to brace yourself. He's safe. He's here. And he needs you." My heartbeat thudded loudly in my ears. My breath trembled. I nodded once, unable to form a word. Grant turned the knob and pushed the door open just enough for warm light from inside to spill into the office. For a moment, the doorway was empty. Then a shadow moved. A figure stepped into view. I knew the shape instantly. The slope of the shoulders, the way his hands fidgeted at his sides, the small scar on his wrist he got at 12 from climbing a fence he had no business climbing. None of it had faded. My mouth fell open. My vision blurred. A quiet, broken sound left my chest before I could stop it. He whispered, "Mom." The word shattered me. I rose, unsteadily, feeling the floor tilt beneath me. My knees trembled. My hand flew to my mouth. I tried to take a step toward him, but the shock hit too hard. My vision dimmed. The room spun. The sound of my own breath grew distant, as if underwater. Ethan reached for me instinctively, but Grant caught my arm just in time, guiding me back into the chair as my legs gave way. The world swayed, my pulse roaring in my ears. I clutched the armrest, struggling to stay upright, struggling to believe any of this was real. Ethan knelt beside me, his face lowered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm here, Mom. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I reached out, touching the sleeve of his jacket with hesitant fingers, afraid he might disappear again if I pressed too hard. The fabric was solid beneath my touch. He was real, warm, alive. Tears slid down my cheeks in silent lines. Grant stood nearby, giving us space yet staying close enough in case I faltered. He spoke softly, steadying the moment with his presence. "He never meant to hurt you, Sylvia. He did what he had to do." Ethan bowed his head, his shoulders trembling. "Mom, I had to keep you safe. I had no choice." I lifted his chin with shaking fingers so I could see him fully. "You're alive," I whispered. "You're alive." And for the first time since the funeral and the cold earth and the folded program in my hand, something inside me began to break open. Not in grief this time, but in a stunned, trembling relief that felt too big for my chest. The room felt smaller once the door closed behind Ethan, as if the air had tightened around the three of us. I sat there, still gripping the armrest with one hand, my other hand resting lightly on his sleeve. I needed the contact to believe what my eyes were seeing. Ethan pulled a chair close and sat facing me, his knees nearly touching mine. He looked thinner, paler, as though the weeks had carved something out of him. But he was breathing, warm, alive. I breathed with him for a moment, letting the reality settle slowly, carefully. Grant moved to the side of the desk and gathered the remaining papers into one neat stack. "There's a lot to go through," he said, "and it won't be easy, but you deserve to know every part of it." I nodded. Though my voice hadn't fully returned, my eyes stayed fixed on Ethan. I studied the tiny scar on his right hand, the way the light caught the faint freckles across his knuckles. I let the simple truth anchor me. My son was alive, and he was sitting 3 feet away. Ethan cleared his throat softly. "I didn't mean for it to happen the way it did, but once things started, I couldn't stop it without putting you at risk." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. I thought I lost you, I whispered. He lowered his eyes. I know. Grant gently placed a folder in front of him. Start from the beginning, he said. She needs to hear it from you. Ethan took a slow breath. Mom, a few months ago, I started noticing irregular withdrawals from your accounts. Not huge amounts at first, just small pieces here and there, disguised as insurance or home maintenance. But the patterns didn't match anything you normally approved. He rubbed his forehead. I checked your statements again and found links to a company I'd never heard of. When I tried to trace it, I hit a wall. My pulse tightened. Who did it lead to? His jaw tensed. Caleb. The room stilled around us. Even the air seemed to hush. Ethan continued. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe he'd used the wrong account, or a temporary mix-up. But then I found messages he sent from an encrypted number about arranging documents. He mentioned guardianship, evaluations, terms, and the name Suncrest appeared more than once. I felt a coldness spreading through my chest. I thought of the torn form in my trash, the envelope he hid at the wake, the urgency in his voice when he offered to help me move. I had ignored my instincts, telling myself grief made suspicion unreasonable, but grief had not created this. I tried to confront him quietly, Ethan said. He denied everything. He said I was paranoid. He said I was jealous of the life he was trying to build. But I could see the fear behind his eyes. He was desperate. Grant added, desperation and access to vulnerable adults is a dangerous combination. Ethan nodded. When I pushed harder, I received a warning. Not from him, from someone else. He swallowed, the muscles in his throat tightening. A man named Reggie. He made it clear that Caleb owed money, a lot of money, and that the house was the only way out. My breath stilled. Why didn't you come to me? I tried, Ethan whispered. But every time I got close, something new happened. And then, something worse. I came home one night and found a bottle on the counter with traces of something added to it. Not enough to hurt you, but enough to confuse you. Enough to make a signature look reasonable. Grant leaned forward. He planned to move quickly. Too quickly. That's why Ethan contacted me. By then, the situation had escalated. We needed time. We needed distance. And we needed to stop the plan without tipping him off. I stared at Ethan. So you disappeared? He nodded slowly. We needed him to believe I was gone. With me out of the way, he'd push harder. He'd rush. And once he rushed, he'd make mistakes we could document. His eyes glistened. I didn't think about what it would do to you. I just kept thinking about keeping you safe. The memory of the funeral pressed into my chest. The folded program. The sound of dirt hitting the casket. The emptiness. All of it built on a lie designed to protect me. My eyes blurred again, but I blinked the tears back, not wanting to lose even a second of this moment. Grant picked up another page. This is where Inez came in. She monitored movements, documented calls, tracked payments to a doctor who was prepared to declare you incompetent. He softened his voice. That doctor has been removed from his position. He was paid in cash. Images of Marissa adding something to my tea flashed in my mind. My skin prickled. I looked at Ethan. You thought they would hurt me. He lowered his head. They already tried. I held my stomach, the nausea rising. What else? I asked, and Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out a small black recorder. He set it on the desk with a trembling hand. I made this before everything happened, before we staged it. I didn't know if I'd get another chance to tell you the truth. He pressed play. His voice filled the room. Mom, If you're hearing this, things have gone farther than I expected. There was a shaky breath. I need you to know that I love you. I need you to trust Grant. I need you to stay calm. And I need you to forgive me for what I've had to do. My hand flew to my mouth as a quiet sound escaped me. Hearing his voice like that, so tender, so frightened, so certain he might never see me again, opened a place inside me I had held shut for weeks. Tears slid down my cheeks without resistance this time. Ethan leaned forward, his hands braced on his knees. Mom, I'm right here. I'm okay. And I'm not going anywhere now. I reached out and touched his cheek, the warmth grounding me. You should have told me, I whispered. I know, he said. I wanted to, but every hour the danger grew. If we didn't move fast, he would have taken everything. Your house, your accounts, your freedom. Grant placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. We have enough evidence now, more than enough. But we need you to stay cautious for a little longer. I nodded weakly. Tell me what I need to do. Ethan squeezed my hand gently. You don't have to do anything alone. I'm here. I'm back. And as the morning light moved slowly across the desk, I felt a fragile strength returning to my chest. Grief had brought me into this room, but truth, painful, complicated, undeniable, was guiding me out of it. I left Grant's office with Ethan beside me, the hallway stretching long and quiet ahead of us. My heartbeat hadn't settled. The knowledge of what Caleb and Marissa were capable of pressed behind my ribs like a steady ache. Outside, the air tasted colder, sharper, as if the world had tilted into a different angle. Ethan walked me to my car, his steps careful, measuring the ground like someone who had spent weeks hiding in shadows. Before opening my door, he placed a gentle hand on my arm. Mom, he said quietly, you have to go home and act exactly as you always would. He can't know anything has changed. The thought of pretending weighed on my chest, but I nodded. I had lived through grief, betrayal, and loss. Pretending normalcy was something I understood all too well. Ethan squeezed my arm once before stepping back. He didn't ride home with me. Grant wanted him elsewhere for now. Some part of me understood the strategy, but another part ached again at the distance. I watched him disappear down the sidewalk, swallowed by the morning sun. Driving home felt like moving through a dream made of glass. Fragile, reflective. Every tree, every rooftop, every mailbox seemed sharper than before. The house looked exactly as I had left it. The porch light off, the curtains half drawn, the wind chime swaying with a soft clatter. Yet stepping inside felt different. I could feel their intentions lingering in the walls. I placed my keys on the hook and let out a slow breath. Grant had told me to look for anything unusual. Ethan had told me not to raise suspicion. Balancing both required a kind of stillness inside me. I moved through the living room as though through water. Shelves, cushions, framed photos all rested exactly where I had left them, yet something in the air felt bruised. On the kitchen table, a small ceramic cup faced the wrong direction. I stared at it for a moment. Something so small shouldn't have meant anything, yet it did. My fingers trembled as I opened the cabinet and reached for the tin of chamomile tea. I remembered Marissa's hands the other night, how she had hovered near the kettle, how she insisted on making the tea herself, how her movements were too smooth. A whisper of worry trickled down my spine. I set the kettle aside and instead opened the drawer where Grant had slipped a tiny testing strip into my bag. I took a clean teaspoon and brushed it across the inside rim of the mug Caleb had used during his visit. Then I dipped the strip. It changed color almost immediately, a color that meant something had been added, something mild but not harmless. My breath caught. The test confirmed what Ethan already suspected. I closed my eyes for a moment, steadying myself against the counter. The betrayal sat heavy, like a stone lodged under my ribs. When I opened my eyes again, a new resolve settled into place. I snapped a photo of the strip, then sealed the spoon inside a plastic bag, just as Inez had instructed. I tucked it into the back of a drawer beneath a stack of old cookbooks. I needed to play my part carefully now. Not long after, my front door opened without a knock. Caleb's voice drifted in, too loud, too cheerful. "Mom, you home?" I schooled my face into something soft before stepping into the hallway. "I'm in here, sweetheart." He walked toward me with the folder from the day before tucked under his arm again. Marissa followed closely behind. Her smile flickered when she saw my expression, but she recovered quickly. Caleb stopped in front of me and held up a single sheet of paper. "I thought maybe we could go over this again," he said. "It's just a simple acknowledgement, nothing binding. It helps get things organized." Forced a smile. "Of course. I appreciate you thinking of me." He looked relieved. Marissa's shoulders loosened. They took seats at the kitchen table. And I made myself sit too, folding my hands neatly in my lap. The paper in front of me looked ordinary enough, but something in the spacing felt off. I scanned it quietly, letting my eyes move slowly the way Grant had trained me. Phrases stood out. Transition of authority, temporary oversight, property evaluation, words that had no business being in anything simple. Caleb tapped the signature line. "All you have to do is sign right there. Just your name. It won't affect anything else today." My pen hovered above the line. He leaned forward, his breath catching slightly, revealing how much he needed this moment. My hand trembled, not from fear, but from the effort of restraint. I let the pen lower to the paper, just barely touching the surface, long enough to make his shoulders lift with anticipation. Then I paused, pressing my fingers to my temple. "Wait," I murmured softly. I'm feeling lightheaded. Maybe I need to sit down for a moment." Marissa was on her feet quickly, moving toward the kitchen counter. "Let me make you tea," she said. "It'll help." The kettle clicked on. Her movements were smooth, practiced. I watched her carefully. She reached for the tin of chamomile, but her hand paused long enough for a small capsule to slip from her sleeve into her palm. The motion was subtle, but I saw it. Every sense sharpened. She emptied the capsule into the hot water with the calm of someone who had done this before. I kept my voice steady. "Actually, I think plain water might be better today. My stomach feels off." Marissa froze. Just a flicker, but enough. Then she smiled again, overly sweet. "Of course. Water is good." Caleb's eyes darted between us, unaware of the moment passing beneath the surface. I pretended not to see anything. I let my hand shake slightly, like an older woman overwhelmed by grief. He placed his hand over mine. "It's okay, Mom. We'll just do the paperwork later." That was all I needed. An exit, a delay, time for Inez and Grant to collect more evidence. I stood slowly. "I think I should lie down for a while. You two can let yourselves out." They hesitated, but something in my fragile act made it believable. They gathered their things. Caleb kissed the top of my head. Marissa hugged me with one arm, her perfume faint but distinct. When they finally left, the door shut softly behind them. I waited several seconds before moving. Then I walked to the corner of the living room where Inez had planted a small camera disguised as a decorative box. I pressed the hidden switch. The tiny light blinked once. Everything had been recorded. I exhaled slowly, letting the truth settle over me like a cold wind. The line between danger and safety had narrowed to a single thread, but I wasn't alone anymore. Not truly. I picked up my phone and sent one careful message to Grant. "We have what you need." The day after Caleb and Marissa left my house, the world felt strangely silent, as if every sound had stepped back to make room for the truth rising around me. I woke early, long before the sun touched the water, and sat at the kitchen table with a cup of plain warm water between my hands. The house was dim, the quiet broken only by the slow ticking of the old wall clock above the pantry. Each tick felt like a reminder that time was shifting, that whatever had been hidden would not stay hidden much longer. I checked my phone. A single message from Grant waited. "Diane found something. Coming soon." The words carried a calm urgency I recognized from years of knowing him. When he chose simple sentences, it meant the news was not simple at all. A few minutes later, another message arrived from Inez. "Leaving now. 2 cars behind. Don't worry." I closed my eyes and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I had lived most of my 62 years trusting in honesty, routine, and family ties, but the past days had shown me how quickly those things could unravel. Now, every step had to be taken with intention. By the time the doorbell rang, the sun had crept above the pines, casting a pale gold across my porch. I opened the door to find Grant standing there with a leather folder under his arm. Behind him, Inez lingered on the walkway, scanning the street with quiet vigilance. She gave me a small nod before stepping inside. Grant didn't waste time. He set the folder on the table and opened it, revealing a spread of printed charts, banking statements, and transfer logs. Diane's handwriting threaded through the margins in neat ink. His glasses slid slightly down his nose as he studied the pages. "We need to show you what Diane uncovered," he said. "It's important you understand the scope." I sat beside him, steadying myself for whatever lay ahead. He handed me a printed page and I traced the numbers with my fingertips. Suncrest Holdings. Subledger transfer. 42,000. Receiver. P. Dalton. Memo. Renovation estimate. There were 5 pages like it, each connecting to a shell company, each pointing to the same buried path. My stomach tightened with each line I read. "This is Caleb?" I asked quietly. Grant nodded. "He used your property as collateral without your permission. Suncrest Holdings isn't a real development company. It's a front. Diane traced the founder to an address that doesn't exist, but the payments do. They link straight to Caleb's accounts." Inez placed her phone on the table, the screen glowing. "And there's more. The doctor who evaluated your cognitive state, he received a series of cash deposits tied to the same network. Diane confirmed the dates." She tapped the screen. "He was paid the week before he completed the form labeling you as having early-stage diminished capacity." My throat tightened. I remembered the faint dizziness after the tea Marissa made, the way the room had tilted just slightly, the small lapses I blamed on grief. I rubbed my palms together, trying to warm the cold that settled under my skin. Grant continued. "Caleb planned to move quickly, too quickly. The buyer they mentioned is scheduled to arrive Friday. He pushed for the earliest date possible. He wanted the sale finalized before anyone could intervene." Inez leaned forward. "But we also have something that shifts the entire picture." She pulled up a video clip. The camera angle was from inside my kitchen. The recording captured Marissa preparing my tea, her movements practiced and quiet. Her hand slipped a small capsule into the cup. My pulse quickened as I watched. The screen showed the steam rising, Marissa stirring once, twice, then carrying the cup toward me with a gentle expression. The truth felt heavy, undeniable. Grant closed his eyes briefly. This confirms intent, not suspicion, not theory, intent. I swallowed the lump in my throat. What happens now? We escalate, Inez said. Diane is filing the financial trail with the state investigator. I'll be coordinating with Novak to secure your home and prepare surveillance. And you... She paused. You keep doing exactly what you've been doing. Calm, normal, predictable. I tried to steady my breath. And Caleb? He's panicking, Grant said. We have reason to believe he met with the buyer yesterday. Diane pulled footage from a parking garage. He looked tense. He knows the deadline is close, and he's under pressure from more than one direction. I pictured the shadowy man Ethan mentioned, the one who threatened him. A chill slid through me. And the other man? The one Ethan mentioned? Inez nodded. We received reports of someone leaving a burnt candle on your porch last night. She held up a photograph. My porch steps. The flicker of a burned-down candle. I hadn't noticed it. My heart contracted. It's a signal, she added quietly. A warning, not from Caleb, from someone tied to his debt. Grant rested his hand on mine. We won't let anything happen to you. Novak already assigned patrols near your neighborhood, but this is why we need to move fast. I breathed out slowly, letting the fear settle before reshaping into something steadier. What do you need me to do? For now, Grant said, stay home, keep receipts, stick to routine, and be ready for Friday. Inez added, before we go, there's one more thing. She reached into her coat pocket and placed a clear plastic bag on the table. Inside was a crumpled piece of paper. This was taken from your fire pit outside. It looks like Marissa tried to burn something. I unfolded it inside the bag, flattening the charred edges. The words were faded but legible enough. Evaluation, guardianship recommendation, transfer approval. My breath caught. This wasn't a draft. This was a completed form. She burned it, I whispered. Why? Grant answered. Because she panicked, and because she knows the window is closing. The morning light shifted across the table, catching the edges of every document that had once been hidden. A truth that had lived in shadows was now spread across my kitchen. Not just suspicion, but evidence, patterns, choices, consequences. And in that moment, the fear that had been tightening in my chest since the funeral gave way to something quieter, stronger, steadier. I sat up straight. Let's finish this. Inez smiled for the first time that morning. We will. Grant gathered the documents, tucked them back into his folder, and stood. Friday is coming, and when it does, everything will change. As they left, I remained at the table, listening to the clock tick above me. Every second felt sharper now, as though time itself had begun counting down. What they didn't know, what none of us knew then, was that the final unraveling had already begun. Friday began before dawn, the sky still ink-dark when I woke. I lay in bed for a moment, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, the steady ticking of the clock down the hall, and the soft groan of the house settling into the early morning chill. Something in the air felt coiled, like a held breath waiting to be released. I dressed slowly, choosing a soft gray sweater and the same pair of slippers I wore every morning. Routine mattered today. Grant had said it. Ethan had said it. Nothing out of pattern. The kettle warmed on the stove, but I didn't make tea. I hadn't made tea alone since the day Inez found those capsules on the camera footage. Instead, I poured myself a glass of water and sat by the kitchen window. The horizon was just beginning to glow with that faint, tentative pink that comes before sunrise. My hands trembled slightly around the glass. I steadied them against the table. A soft knock sounded at the door. 3 gentle taps. I opened it to find Inez standing on the porch, dressed in her usual dark jacket, hair pulled back tight, eyes alert but warm. "Morning," she whispered. "We're setting up now." Behind her, 2 unmarked cars idled quietly at the curb. One held a man I recognized from earlier briefings. The other held someone I had never seen, but the posture revealed the same readiness. Inez stepped inside, closing the door behind her. She carried a small black device that she set on the console table near the entryway. "Commander Novak will give the signal when everything is in place," she said. "You won't need to do anything except stay calm." I managed a thin smile. "Calm," I echoed. "I can try." She softened. "You've been doing more than trying." Another knock came, louder this time. Caleb's voice followed. "Mom, you awake?" My pulse quickened. Inez stepped back into the hallway, invisible from the door. I drew in a steady breath and opened it. Caleb stood on the porch holding a stack of documents, his face arranged into a mask of tired concern. "Morning," he said, stepping inside without waiting for me to answer. "Big day. I thought I'd come early so we can get everything ready before the buyer comes." I nodded gently. "Of course. Come in." Marissa entered behind him, clutching her purse so tightly the knuckles on her right hand had gone pale. Her gaze flicked around the room, quick and sharp, as if searching for something out of place. I kept my face soft and unbothered. I had rehearsed this expression in the mirror the night before. They settled at the kitchen table, spreading out the papers. Caleb's fingers tapped rapidly against the surface, an unconscious rhythm revealing nerves beneath his confident tone. "Once the buyer arrives, we'll finalize the transfer," he said. "It should be quick. You'll barely need to do anything. Just confirm a few details." I slid into my seat across from him. "I trust you," I said quietly. Marissa's eyes softened with relief. The lie slid out of me with surprising ease. Survival had a way of rewriting instincts. 10 minutes passed. Caleb reviewed numbers. Marissa organized signatures. I kept my breathing steady. Then, without any warning, a phone buzzed on the table. Caleb picked it up, glanced at the screen, and muttered something under his breath. "He's here," he said. He didn't notice the way my heartbeat shifted. He didn't see the way Inez's shadow moved silently around the corner. He didn't sense the quiet storm developing outside. A sharp, confident knock rattled the front door. Caleb straightened his jacket, cleared his throat, and motioned for Marissa to stay seated. "Let me handle this," he said with a deep breath. He walked to the door and opened it. The man on the porch wore jeans, a dark jacket, and a calm, unreadable expression. I recognized him instantly from the briefing. He wasn't a buyer. He was an undercover deputy trained to play the role convincingly. He stepped inside with a polite nod. "Mr. Mercer," he said. "Ready to finalize the terms?" Caleb exhaled with visible relief. "Yes, everything is prepared." The deputy glanced around the house as if assessing property value, but what he was really doing was giving the silent cue to Commander Novak, who waited just outside with his team. Caleb gestured toward the table. "We'll just need a moment to go through the conditions." The deputy moved closer. "Before we begin, I need to confirm something with Mrs. Mercer directly." He turned to me. His voice lowered slightly. "Ma'am, could you look at me for a moment?" I lifted my eyes. That was the signal. The hallway behind him filled with footsteps, faint but firm. Inez stepped forward. Commander Novak entered from the porch, followed by 2 officers in plain clothes. The energy in the room shifted instantly. Caleb's face drained of color. "What is this?" he snapped. "Who are you people?" Novak's voice was steady. "Mr. Mercer, please step away from the table." Marissa rose abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Caleb," she whispered, "do something." Inez placed a file on the table and opened it. "We have documentation of unauthorized transfers, forged signatures, attempted sedation, and an illegal evaluation submitted without consent." Caleb backed away slowly. "You can't prove any of that. You don't understand." Novak stepped forward, voice firm. "We understand enough. You need to place your hands behind your back." Marissa made a sudden move toward the hallway, clutching her purse. An officer intercepted her at the corner. She started crying, her words tumbling out in fractured sentences. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, shaking. "I just wanted to help him. He said it was temporary. He said—" Caleb turned toward her, face twisted with anger and fear. "You told them? Is that it? You—" "Stop," Novak ordered. "That's enough." Caleb spun back to me, his voice cracking. "Mom, please, tell them this is a misunderstanding. Tell them you trust me." The world slowed. Every moment of the past weeks pressed through me at once. The strange glances at the wake, the torn documents, the tea, the whispered conversations, the hidden signatures, the candle on my porch, and over all of it, Ethan's trembling voice on that recorder saying he loved me. I stood, steadying my hand on the table. "I did trust you," I said, "and you used that trust against me." Caleb's breath broke. The officer stepped in, securing his wrists gently but firmly. He didn't resist. His shoulders slumped as though something inside him had finally collapsed. Marissa sobbed as another officer led her toward the door. The house filled with motion for several minutes, murmured instructions, clipped radios, the shuffle of shoes on the hardwood. Through the open doorway, I saw Ethan standing beside the patrol cars. He hadn't been allowed inside until the situation was safe. When our eyes met, something unspoken passed between us, a quiet understanding heavier than words. Novak approached me after the arrests. "It's over," he said gently. "You're safe now." But safety was a complicated word. I watched the cars pull away, the morning still dim, the air cool. My heart felt bruised, but steady. Ethan stepped inside and wrapped his arm lightly around my shoulders. "I'm here," he said softly. For the first time in weeks, I let myself believe it. The house felt strangely hollow after the patrol cars pulled away, as if the walls themselves were adjusting to the sudden quiet. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching the last hint of red and blue fade down the street. In the stillness that followed, the weight of everything finally pressed through me. Not the frantic fear of the past days, not the sharp shock of the arrests, but something deeper, a kind of heavy settling. Ethan guided me to the couch, his hand steady on my back. "You should sit," he murmured. His voice was gentle, stripped of the tension he had carried for weeks. I nodded and lowered myself onto the cushions. The living room looked the same. Family photos, a lamp, a soft throw draped over the armrest. But something inside me had shifted so profoundly I could hardly recognize my own breathing. Grant arrived shortly after, carrying a thick stack of documents and his open briefcase. He moved with a quiet seriousness I had come to understand as his version of urgency. When he reached the coffee table, he placed the papers down and sat across from me, clasping his hands. "We'll need to start the official process," he said softly. "But we can move at your pace." My eyes drifted to the folder. "What happens first?" "Asset freeze," he replied. "The court will secure everything under your name until the investigation is complete. Caleb and Marissa won't have access to anything." His tone was steady, respectful of the wound beneath the conversation. "There will also be arraignments, hearings, evaluations, but you won't handle any of it alone." Ethan sat beside me, leaning forward. "I'll be with you, every step." I swallowed a tight breath. The betrayal had cut deep, but sitting here with my son alive beside me, I felt something softer at the edges. Grief had changed shape again, turning into a kind of quiet ache that no longer blinded me. Grant continued, opening a smaller envelope. "There's an additional matter, something I believe deserves attention before the media learns anything." "Media?" I asked. He nodded. "This case is unusual. A falsified death, a forged signature, financial exploitation. It's the kind of story people latch onto. And once word spreads, the fact that another family lost someone whose identity was never claimed, will rise to the surface." A heaviness moved through my chest. The unclaimed man, the body I had mourned under a false belief, the man whose funeral I attended without knowing his name. Ethan's voice softened. "Mom, we don't have to talk about that now." "No," I whispered. "We do." Grant set the envelope in my hands. Inside was a brief note from the investigator who had traced the unknown man's origins. A name had been found. A sister. A nephew. People who thought he had vanished years ago. People who were now asking questions that mirrored my own. I stood slowly, the need for movement guiding me. My legs felt unsteady, but I walked toward the mantel where the framed picture of my sons rested. I touched the corner of the frame. "What do they want from us?" "They don't want anything," Grant said. "They only asked for the truth and the chance to honor him properly." The weight of responsibility settled around me like a shawl. It was not guilt exactly, but something neighboring it. A sense of shared sorrow. A sense that grief sometimes overlaps, binding strangers together. "I want to meet them," I said softly. "I want to thank them. And I want to tell him goodbye. Properly this time." Ethan rose and placed a hand on my shoulder. "If that's what you want, we'll arrange it." Later that afternoon, Novak contacted me. He confirmed that the unclaimed man's family had agreed to travel to the small cemetery where his temporary marker still rested. No headstone, just a simple wooden sign placed by the groundskeeper. We arranged a quiet gathering for the following morning. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I lay in bed with the blankets pulled to my chin, staring at the faint glow of the street lamp through my curtains. The world outside seemed so still, the kind of still that arrives only after something enormous has ended. Morning came with a pale gold light brushing across my pillow. I dressed in a simple black coat and soft scarf before meeting Ethan by the front door. He drove us in silence, the road winding gently toward the cemetery at the edge of town. When we arrived, I saw them, a woman in her late 60s, a younger man beside her, and a girl in her 20s holding a single white flower. They stood near the temporary marker, speaking quietly with Novak. I approached slowly. The older woman looked up, her eyes soft but full of a sadness I recognized. She stepped toward me, and without hesitation, she took my hands. "You're Sylvia," she said. "I'm Margaret. He was my brother." Her voice shook, and I felt something inside me unravel. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. I didn't know. I, I thought. She squeezed my hands gently. We understand. They told us everything. None of this was your fault. The younger man nodded. We're grateful he wasn't alone in those final moments. Even if you didn't know who he was. I felt tears prick my eyes. Ethan stood close, his presence grounding me as I knelt and placed a small bouquet of lilies at the base of the marker. The earth was cool beneath my hand. I'm sorry, I whispered to the ground, to the man whose story had intertwined with mine in a way neither of us could have expected. You deserved more. You deserved someone to say your name. Margaret knelt beside me and placed her flower next to mine. The moment stretched quietly, held by shared loss and the gentle wind moving through the grass. When we stood again, my chest felt lighter, not healed, but opened. The ache shifted, softened by connection, by honesty, by the simple act of honoring a stranger whose path had crossed mine in the darkest of ways. As we walked back to the car, the sun rose higher, warming the top of my head. Ethan opened the passenger door for me, his eyes watching mine carefully. You okay? He asked. I took a slow breath. Not okay, I said. But better, he nodded. Better is enough for today. And as he started the engine, I looked once more toward the cemetery gates. What had begun in confusion and grief now moved forward with clarity, with truth, with a sense of responsibility settled gently where the fear had once lived. There was still a long road ahead. Court hearings, legal resolutions, emotional reckonings. But for the first time, the path felt steady under my feet. The week after the small ceremony at the cemetery moved slowly, each day shaped by paperwork, meetings, and moments of stillness that pulled at me from the inside. News of the investigation had begun circling through town in quiet whispers. People didn't say much to my face, but I could feel their eyes soften when I walked into the grocery store or stopped at the post office. Some looked away out of discomfort, unsure how to approach me. Others offered gentle nods, the kind that carried sympathy without intrusion. I accepted them all with the same calm, knowing that grief had its own language and everyone spoke it differently. One morning, my mailbox held a small stack of envelopes, bills, notices, a coupon booklet, and then, at the very back, an envelope with handwriting I recognized immediately. My breath caught. The loops in the letters were familiar, shaped by years of impatience and pride. Caleb. A small sting tightened in my chest as I slid a finger along the seal. Inside was a folded sheet of notebook paper. Simple. Plain. My hands shook slightly as I unfolded it. Mom, I know you may never read this. I don't deserve for you to. I've had a lot of time to think, and I keep replaying everything I did, everything I justified to myself. I told myself I was helping us. I told myself I was saving our future. I told myself a lot of things that weren't true. I hurt you, and I hurt Ethan, and I hurt myself in ways I didn't understand until now. I'm sorry. I don't expect forgiveness. I just don't want you to be afraid of me anymore. Caleb. I sank into the kitchen chair, letting the letter rest on my lap. The apology wasn't an excuse. It wasn't polished or careful. It was raw, uneven, and unmistakably his. Tears didn't come. Not yet. Instead, a slow ache settled in my chest, like a bruise touched by sunlight. Later that afternoon, Ethan stepped into the kitchen holding a bag of groceries. I brought stew mix, he said. Thought it might be a nice change. He set the bag down and glanced at me. You okay? You look quiet. I handed him the letter. He read it slowly, his jaw tightening at certain lines. loosening at others. When he finished, he folded the paper and placed it on the table with a careful touch. "He should have written this months ago," Ethan muttered, but his voice wasn't sharp. It carried exhaustion and something softer beneath it, a complicated kind of hurt that didn't have a name yet. "He's starting somewhere," I said. Ethan leaned his hands on the counter, his shoulders heavy. "I know, it's just hard to trust intentions right now." "I'm not asking you to trust anything," I said gently, "only to let the truth sit where it needs to." He didn't answer, but he nodded, staring at the letter as though trying to find a way to reconcile the brother he once loved with the man who had betrayed us both. A few days later, the first scheduled visit arrived, a family conversation. The psychologist at the facility called it. I felt strangely numb as Ethan drove us there. The road cut through wide fields and passing clusters of trees. The farther we drove, the quieter the world became. When we reached the building, its gray facade rose against the sky in an unassuming block. Inside, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and pencil lead. A guard led us through 2 sets of doors and down a hallway lined with bulletin boards. We waited in a small room with a rectangular table and 4 chairs. A faint hum from the fluorescent lights filled the silence. Ethan paced. I stayed seated, hands folded in my lap. When the door opened, Caleb stepped in wearing a standard khaki uniform. His hair was shorter, his face thinner, but his eyes, those same storm-colored eyes he had since childhood, held a vulnerability I hadn't seen in years. He stopped when he saw us. "Mom," he said. Softly, I stood. Not quickly, not with the instinctive embrace of the past, just gently, steadily. "Hello, Caleb." He lowered his head, unable to meet my gaze. "Thank you for coming," he whispered. We sat. Ethan remained standing for a moment longer before lowering himself into the chair beside me. His stiffness was visible, a rigid line drawn around his posture. Dr. Miller, the psychologist, entered quietly and sat at the far end of the table. "We'll take this slowly," he said. "There's no need to rush." Caleb clasped his hands together. "I don't expect anything," he began. "I don't expect you to believe me or forgive me. I just needed to say I'm sorry. I've been working through everything, every day, every night. It hasn't been easy, but it's made things clearer." I studied his face for a moment. There were hollowed places beneath his eyes, the kind only real remorse carves. "I read your letter," I said. He nodded once, hard. "I meant every word." Ethan let out a breath, his voice steady but cool. "You almost destroyed Mom." Caleb's eyes flickered to him, then back down. "I know." "You almost destroyed me," Ethan added. "I know," Caleb whispered again. "And I can't undo it." The silence stretched, thick and trembling. Dr. Miller watched quietly, giving space. I reached across the table and placed my hand on Caleb's. His skin was warm, trembling. "I'm not here to erase the past," I said. "I'm here to understand what comes next." Caleb lifted his gaze. His eyes shone. "What can come next?" he asked. "Accountability," I said. "Work, healing, time." His breath shook. "Do you think, someday, we could be a family again?" Ethan stood abruptly, pushing his chair back. "Not today," he said firmly. But then he added, more quietly, "Maybe someday. I don't know." Caleb nodded, accepting the uncertainty without protest. When the session ended, Caleb rose slow and hesitant. Before leaving, he looked at me again. Thank you for coming. It meant more than you know. Ethan placed his hand lightly on my shoulder as Caleb was led toward the hallway. You did well, he murmured. No, I said softly. We all did. On the drive home, the sky stretched wide and pale. I watched the trees blur past the window, feeling the weight inside me shift gently, like something turning toward the possibility of peace. Healing wasn't a straight line. It wasn't quick, or easy, or neat. But it had begun, and beginnings, I had learned, were worth holding on to. The morning of Caleb's hearing arrived with a soft gray sky stretching over the coastline. I woke before the alarm, lying still in the half-light, listening to the slow rhythm of the waves beyond my window. The sea had always been my measure of time. Today, its steady pulse felt like a reminder that life kept moving, no matter what pain or change pressed against it. I sat up slowly, wrapped a shawl around my shoulders, and walked to the kitchen where the old clock ticked above the sink. That sound grounded me as I prepared a cup of warm water, letting the steam brush my face. Ethan emerged from the hallway with tired eyes. He had not slept well either. You ready? He asked quietly. As ready as I can be, I answered. He nodded, but I saw the tension in his jaw. The thought of sitting in the same room where strangers would judge his brother's future unsettled him. It unsettled all of us, yet we dressed in calm colors, steady tones, and left the house with the quiet determination of people who had lived through worse storms. The courthouse stood in the center of town, a square building with tall steps and stone pillars polished by decades of salt air. Outside, a few reporters lingered across the street, waiting for something notable to unfold. Their presence made my chest tighten, but Ethan walked close beside me, offering silent reassurance. We entered through the side door, guided by a clerk who had been briefed in advance. Inside the hearing room, the air felt still. A long wooden table stretched across the front, where 3 members of the board sat straight-backed, their expressions neutral. A small digital recorder blinked on the desk. There were chairs arranged in rows behind a low rail. Ethan and I sat in the second row, the place reserved for family willing to speak if asked. Caleb was brought in through a side door. He looked thinner than the last time I saw him, but his posture was steadier. His hands were clasped in front of him, and his eyes searched the room until they found mine. For a moment, something warm flickered there, hope mixed with fear. I offered him a small nod. Not a promise, not forgiveness, just acknowledgement, a beginning. Dr. Miller entered next, carrying a folder thick with months of notes. He greeted the board quietly and took his seat. When the room settled, the lead board member cleared his throat and began. This hearing will review the progress of Caleb Mercer and determine whether he qualifies for supervised release. We will hear reports, statements, and recommendations. After that, the board will deliberate. Caleb listened with his shoulders straight, his breathing steady. I remembered him as a boy, restless, bright, always chasing something just out of reach. Now he sat rooted, ready to face whatever came. Dr. Miller spoke first. He described Caleb's attendance in counseling, his participation in work programs, his willingness to confront difficult patterns. His voice carried neither praise nor flattery, only truth. He is taking responsibility, he said. Not quickly, not easily, but honestly. The board asked questions about behavior, progress, interactions with staff. Caleb answered each one in a quiet, steady voice. I recognized the humility there, a kind I had not seen in him for years. It stirred something inside me, something painful, something protective, something uncertain. Then the lead board member turned toward the seating area. "Mrs. Mercer, would you like to speak?" The room grew very still. I rose slowly, feeling the attention settle around me like a fragile fabric. Ethan watched me with a tight expression, torn between worry and respect. I stepped to the small podium and placed my hands on its cool surface. "My name is Sylvia Mercer," I began. "I am Caleb's mother." A simple sentence, yet it trembled through the room with a weight I hadn't expected. "I won't pretend the past months have been easy," I continued. "I won't pretend the hurt has disappeared. What happened changed the shape of our family. It changed the shape of my trust. But it also opened a path for truth. And truth, even when painful, can lead to something better." Caleb lifted his head slowly, watching every word. "I've read his letters," I said. "I've seen his effort. I've heard his remorse. And though I'm not ready for forgiveness, I am ready to believe in the possibility of his healing." A soft sound escaped the room, barely audible. "I support his release under supervision," I said, "with counseling, with guidance, and with the understanding that rebuilding trust is not a promise but a process. He must earn every step, and I believe he is willing to try." I returned to my seat. Ethan exhaled slowly, tension slipping from his shoulders. The board thanked me and asked a few final questions. Then the room was quiet. After a brief recess, the board returned. The lead member spoke with clear, calm authority. "After reviewing all statements and evidence, we grant supervised release with conditions. Mr. Mercer will continue counseling, maintain employment, and follow all restrictions. Mrs. Mercer retains authority to request reevaluation if concerns arise." Caleb's eyes closed in relief, a single tear sliding down his cheek. Ethan looked away, his own conflict clear in the set of his jaw. I felt a tightness in my chest loosen, not entirely, but enough to draw a steady breath. When the hearing ended, Caleb approached the rail. A guard stood beside him, but the moment was his. "Mom," he whispered. "Thank you." I placed my hand on the rail separating us. "This is the beginning," I said gently. "Not the end." Ethan walked closer, hesitant. Caleb looked at him with careful hope. Ethan didn't speak, but he gave a small nod, an unspoken acknowledgement that said, "I'm watching. I'm cautious, but I'm here." Outside, the sky had brightened into a muted blue. The reporters lingered still, but their presence felt distant. The world seemed wider now, less sharp around the edges. As we walked toward the parking lot, I felt the first quiet shift of something long dormant. Not joy, not forgiveness, but a slow, cautious stirring of possibility. Healing moved at its own pace, and today, for the first time, we were all moving with it. The first lunch after Caleb's release felt like stepping onto thin ice, quiet, careful, every breath measured. I spent the morning cooking, choosing simple things that didn't draw attention: chicken soup, warm rolls, a small pot of rice, comfort food without grand gestures. The kitchen filled with soft steam as the old clock ticked steadily above the doorway, its sound grounding me. I set 3 places at the table, smoothing the napkins more times than necessary. Each small act steadied my hands. Ethan arrived first. He carried a basket of fruit and placed it on the counter with a kind of restless energy. "Do you want help with anything?" he asked, though his eyes kept drifting toward the window, toward the driveway, toward the moment he couldn't control. "You can pour the water," I said gently. He nodded and reached for the glasses, his movements tight, shoulders tense. I didn't push. The distance between him and his brother was still raw, and healing did not follow a clock's precision. Some wounds took their time. When Caleb arrived, he knocked softly before stepping in. The doorframe seemed to pause around him as he removed his cap and held it awkwardly. He looked thinner still, but steadier, as if the weight he carried was one he'd chosen to face. His eyes landed on me first. "Hi, Mom," he said. "Come in," I answered, offering a small smile. "We're just getting settled." He stepped forward, glancing briefly at Ethan before lowering his gaze. "I wasn't sure what to bring," he said, holding up a paper bag. "I stopped at the bakery, got some cornbread." "That's perfect," I told him. He handed it to me, his fingers trembling just slightly. I saw shame flicker across his face. A quiet apology lived in that tremble, one he didn't know how to put into words. We sat at the table, the three of us arranged with a careful distance between each chair. I poured soup into bowls, the warm scent of herbs rising between us. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence wasn't hostile, just delicate. Ethan cleared his throat. "How was your first night?" he asked Caleb, keeping his tone neutral. Caleb nodded. "Quiet, structured, but fine." He shifted in his seat. "They gave me a list of places I can apply for work. I'm supposed to start interviews next week." "That's good," I said, more to ease him than to comment. "Structure can help." He looked at me with something close to gratitude. "Yeah, I think it will." The conversation drifted to small, safe topics: weather, local news, a new supermarket opening near the highway. But beneath each sentence lived the weight of everything unsaid. Every pause felt like a careful negotiation of space and history. I noticed Caleb's hands most of all. They trembled slightly as he held the spoon. When he reached for the water pitcher, the tremor grew more visible. He steadied it with both hands, pouring carefully, deliberately. A small drop spilled onto the table, and he jolted as if expecting reprimand. "It's all right," I said softly. He nodded quickly, wiping it with a napkin. "Sorry," he whispered. Ethan watched him, not with anger, but with a guarded, conflicted curiosity. The kind someone feels when facing a version of a person they once loved but hardly recognized anymore. Halfway through the meal, I noticed Caleb's gaze drifting to the living room shelf. On it sat a framed photograph of the boys when they were young. Caleb with a baseball mitt too big for his hand, Ethan with grass stains on his knees. Their smiles then were effortless, boundless. Caleb's eyes softened as he looked at it, and for a moment, he seemed to return to that simpler version of himself. "Do you remember that day?" I asked gently. He nodded, his lips pressing together. "Dad brought us to the field. I begged him to let me pitch." "You hit Ethan with the ball," I recalled. Caleb let out a small, breathy laugh, his shoulders loosening. "I did, and he told everyone at school I had no aim." Ethan allowed himself a tiny smile. "You didn't." Caleb shook his head. "Still don't." The moment settled between them like a warm breeze passing through an open window. It didn't erase anything. It didn't redeem everything, but it softened the edges. We finished eating slowly, savoring the quiet rather than the food. When I stood to gather the dishes, Caleb rose immediately. "Let me help," he said. "You're a guest," I replied. "I don't want to be treated like one," he said softly. So I let him. He carried bowls to the sink, moving carefully as if afraid to break anything. His hands trembled again when he set a glass down, and he paused, steadying himself before releasing it. When he turned back to me, His expression held something fragile, hope mixed with fear of losing it. After the dishes were done, the three of us stepped outside for air. The breeze carried the scent of the sea, that familiar mix of salt and pine. Caleb stood with his hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched. Ethan leaned against the porch railing, watching him. "Mom," Caleb said, turning to me, "I know things can't go back to the way they were, and I'm not asking for that. I just want to earn my place again. Slowly, however long it takes." I nodded. "Slow is fine," I said. "Slow is safe." He swallowed hard. "Thank you." Ethan shifted, his expression tight but not closed. "I'm not ready," he said quietly. "But I'm not walking away either." Caleb nodded, accepting the boundary without question. "That's enough for now." The wind rustled through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, gulls called out over the water. The world felt bigger than our past, bigger than our mistakes, bigger than the pain that had pulled us apart. After a while, Caleb glanced at his watch. "I should get going," he said. "They expect me back for check-in." I walked him to the driveway. He paused beside his ride, the afternoon sun brushing his face with a soft glow. "Thanks for lunch," he murmured. "You're welcome," I said, touching his arm lightly. He hesitated before stepping back. "Can we do this again sometime?" "Maybe," I said, "one step at a time." He nodded, the acceptance deep in his eyes, and climbed in. As the car pulled away, I watched it disappear slowly down the street. Ethan approached quietly beside me. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Like something moved," I said. "Not much, but enough." He rested a hand on my shoulder. "That's all we can do." We stood in the quiet afternoon light, letting the air settle around us, letting the first fragile threads of healing find their shape. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reunion. It was the first step toward something honest. The years that followed unfolded in soft, uneven steps, like a tide that rose and fell without hurry. Healing rarely announced itself. It arrived quietly, in the small corners of ordinary days. Looking back now, I can see how each season carried a new shape, how time itself worked as a gentle instrument, sanding down the sharp edges that once ruled our lives. The first year was the hardest. Caleb lived under strict supervision in a modest apartment near the community center. He attended counseling 3 times a week. He worked in the maintenance department at a local elementary school, patching fences, painting hallways, repairing loose steps. He once told me it felt right to fix things that had been broken, even if they weren't his. His hands were steadier then, though every now and then I still saw the tremble when he picked up a tool or poured a cup of coffee. We didn't rush our contact. Sometimes a whole month passed with nothing more than a short phone call. Other times, he sent me letters, simple updates written on yellow legal pads. He wrote about the children at the school, about how one little boy insisted he looked like a superhero because he carried a tool belt. He wrote about the pride he felt finishing a project on time. He wrote about the shame that still followed him like a shadow and the ways he tried to live differently. Ethan read every letter, even when he pretended he wasn't interested. He never admitted it, but I often found the pages smoothed carefully on the kitchen counter after I'd left them there. His anger didn't disappear. It softened around the edges, shaped by distance and time, and the understanding that regret doesn't erase a past, but it can illuminate a future. Some nights, Ethan stayed over, helping fix a loose board on my fence or sharing a quiet meal. I often found him on the porch afterward, staring at the moonlit sea as if searching for something only the water could answer. The loss of what he thought he'd buried, the pain of seeing me grieve him, had carved its own mark into him. It took him longer to find ease than it did me. But he kept walking toward it, one breath at a time. My own life settled into a gentler rhythm. I spent mornings reading on the porch, the air smelling of salt and pine. I befriended neighbors who walked their dogs along the beach. I discovered a pottery class at the community center, where I made bowls that leaned slightly to the left, but held soup just the same. The instructors never commented on the imperfections. They said imperfections made things human. Evie visited often. She always brought something: fresh bread, a scarf she'd found on sale, a book she thought I'd enjoy. We sat on my porch sipping warm water or tea, watching the horizon shift colors. She shared stories about her own family, mistakes made and forgiven, lessons she wished she'd learned sooner. Her voice held the calm wisdom of someone who had weathered many storms and understood that healing wasn't a single act but a lifetime's practice. In the second year, something frightening happened. One afternoon, a note appeared on my doorstep, written in sharp, hurried letters. "You should be careful." My chest tightened when I read it. Old fear sprang back like a shadow I had outrun but not erased. Ethan drove over immediately. I watched him search the yard, anger rippling through him like wind across water. But the investigation revealed nothing. Commander Novak traced the handwriting to no one connected to our case, likely a stray attempt to scare an older woman living alone. Unsettling, but unrelated. The threat fizzled out as quickly as it came. Still, for a while I slept with the hallway light on. By the third year, Caleb found a new place in the world. He earned his GED, then took evening classes in basic carpentry. I attended his small recognition ceremony at the community center, sitting in the second row beside a handful of teachers and classmates. He scanned the room until he saw me, and his face softened. Afterward, he hugged me, cautiously, as if afraid he might overstep, but I held onto him a moment longer than he expected. Not forgiveness, not absolution, just warmth, offered freely. He began assisting with an adult literacy program on weekends, helping people who hadn't held a pencil in decades learn how to read prescription labels or write simple letters. One day he told me, with a shy smile, that teaching someone to read felt like giving them a key they didn't know they lost. Ethan still kept his guard up, but he attended one of Caleb's evening classes. He didn't tell me he was going. I found out when Caleb mentioned seeing him in the back of the room, arms crossed, listening. They didn't speak that night. They didn't need to. Some bridges are rebuilt plank by plank, not in one dramatic moment. The community, once cautious, began to shift as well. People who once looked at Caleb with suspicion now greeted him with nods, then conversations, then invitations to volunteer days at the school. The town had seen worse stories. It had witnessed redemption in small and steady forms. Eventually, the past stopped defining him quite so sharply. Meanwhile, my house by the sea grew quieter in all the right ways. I learned to sleep through the night again. I learned to walk the shoreline without carrying the weight of every memory. I found myself humming while cleaning the kitchen, a small thing that felt like a sign of life returning. One evening in early autumn, I sat on the porch with a soft blanket over my knees. The sky glowed a deep orange, and the air carried that gentle cooling that hinted at the season turning. Caleb stopped by after class, wearing a clean flannel shirt and holding a folder filled with certificates he'd earned. We didn't talk long. He sat on the steps facing the sea. Ethan arrived a little later with takeout containers and stood beside him. They didn't speak at first. Two silhouettes framed by the setting sun, both burdened and brave in their own ways. After a while, Ethan handed Caleb one of the containers. Caleb accepted it with a quiet thank you. I watched them, my heart full and aching at the same time. A moment not perfect, but real. A moment shaped by work and pain and hope. Time had become a quiet companion in our lives, not rushing, not promising miracles, just moving us forward, steady and sure, toward whatever waited next. And as the last light faded into the sea, I realized something simple and profound. We were learning to live again. The morning of Caleb's recognition ceremony arrived with a soft brightness that settled gently over the town, the kind of light that hinted at change without asking for attention. I woke early, long before the alarm, and stood by the window watching the sun rise over the sea. The waves rolled in a slow rhythm, steady and patient, as if reminding me that every ending had a beginning hidden inside it. I wrapped my shawl around my shoulders and took my time getting ready. Today wasn't a celebration in the loud sense. It was something smaller, quieter, deeper. Ethan arrived first, knocking twice before stepping inside. He wore a dark sweater and held a small gift bag in his hand. "I didn't know what to get," he said, placing it on the table. "So I got a notebook. Figured maybe he could use it." "I think he will," I answered, tying my scarf. "Thank you." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. In the past year, his walls had not collapsed, but they had eased, softened in the corners. He had carried too much for too long, and letting go had become a slow, careful task. Sometimes I could see the boy he used to be, quiet, observant, loyal in his own way, peeking through the adult he had become. We drove together to the community center, the same building where I had taken pottery classes and exercise sessions with Evie. The parking lot was half full. Nothing grand, nothing showy. Inside, the hall had been arranged with rows of folding chairs and a small stage decorated with potted plants borrowed from the library. People from the literacy program gathered quietly, teachers, classmates, volunteers. I recognized a few faces that had become familiar over the years, faces that had watched Caleb grow into a steadier version of himself. When he walked in, he paused near the doorway. He wore a clean button-down shirt tucked neatly into dark slacks. His hair was trimmed, his posture straight, and his eyes scanned the room cautiously. When he saw me, he offered a shy smile. Not a confident one, not a practiced one, just honest. I lifted my hand in greeting. He approached slowly, almost sheepishly. "You made it," he said. "Of course," I replied. "I wouldn't miss this." Ethan stepped forward, handing him the small gift bag. Caleb looked surprised. He opened it carefully, lifting out the notebook with both hands. The corners of his mouth lifted. "Thank you," he said quietly. Ethan nodded once. "You'll put it to good use." There was no embrace, no dramatic moment, just a steady exchange between brothers who were learning how to face each other again. It was enough. We took our seats as the coordinator welcomed everyone. The ceremony was simple. Short speeches, certificates handed out one by one, modest applause that echoed gently through the hall. When Caleb's name was called, he walked to the front with measured steps. He accepted his certificate with a small nod. And when he turned toward the audience, his gaze found mine briefly. I smiled. He smiled back in a way that made my chest tighten with something warm and painful all at once. Afterward, people mingled, sharing small congratulations and light conversation. I let Caleb speak with his classmates first, watching quietly from the side of the room. When the crowd thinned, he approached me. "Mom," he said gently, "there's something I want to give you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. My breath caught as soon as I saw it. The shape, the size, the way he held it. I knew before he opened it what rested inside. He loosened the drawstring and tipped the pouch into his palm. A watch slid into the light, the old brass casing worn smooth with years of use, the same watch I had given him on his 17th birthday, the watch he wore for school, for interviews, for every milestone he once dreamed of reaching, the watch that had vanished during the years when he drifted away from us. He held it gently, as if it were made of glass. "I found it in a box when I moved," he said. "I didn't think I deserved to keep it. Not after everything." My throat tightened. I reached out, my fingers brushing the cool metal. The weight of it felt like a memory returning home. He stepped closer and, with careful hands, lifted my wrist. His touch trembled as he fastened the clasp. The moment carried no speeches, no explanation. Just the slow, deliberate act of placing something lost back where it belonged. When he finished, he lowered his hands and stepped back. His eyes glistened. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he whispered. "I just wanted you to have it." Tears rose suddenly, slipping across my cheeks without resistance. I touched the watch with my free hand, tracing the familiar face of it. The ticking was faint but steady. A heartbeat, a promise, a reminder of time that had wounded us and time that now offered us a fragile truce. "Thank you," I said, my voice breaking softly. Ethan stood a few feet away, watching us. Something passed through his expression, something unguarded, something weary, something hopeful. When Caleb turned toward him, Ethan hesitated for a heartbeat. Then he stepped forward and placed a hand on his brother's shoulder. Not tightly, not with full warmth, just a touch, a beginning. Caleb swallowed hard, nodding once. Ethan nodded back. Evie arrived then, carrying a small tote bag and wearing her usual warm smile. She greeted both of them with a gentle nod before turning to me. "You okay?" she whispered. I looked down at the watch on my wrist, its weight anchoring me. "I think," I said slowly, "I'm more than okay." Outside, the late afternoon sun painted the parking lot in gold. A soft breeze carried the scent of sea salt and warm pavement. We walked out together, Ethan a little ahead, Caleb a step behind, me in the middle. Our shadows stretching long across the ground. Life had not returned to what it once was, and it never would. But something new had taken root, something real, something earned. As we reached the car, a small envelope slipped from Caleb's pocket. He bent to pick it up and tucked it away quickly. "A letter from Marissa," he said quietly, almost apologetically. "She wrote to me. I haven't opened it yet." I nodded. "You can decide what to do with it in your own time." He looked relieved, as if expecting judgment and finding none. I placed my hand over the watch once more, feeling its gentle pulse against my skin. Time had carried us through storms we never imagined, through loss and fear and betrayal. But time also brought us here, to a moment shaped by truth, humility, and the beginnings of healing. As we drove home, the sky glowed in soft shades of orange and rose. The world outside the windows looked familiar again. Not perfect, but possible. And for the first time in a very long time, my heart felt light enough to believe in what tomorrow might bring.